On September 1st, 1939, Germany invaded Poland, triggering a declaration of war by Britain and France. What followed was the most devastating conflict the world has ever seen. World War II had begun. By the end of 1940, Germany's forces had swept across Europe, conquering France, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Norway. Britain found itself standing alone, and the German Luftwaffe launched an intense bombing campaign, sparking the Battle of Britain. In the end, it was Hitler's first major failure. The British resistance held. But Hitler wasn't done. In June of 1941, he turned east and launched Operation Barbarossa, a massive invasion of the Soviet Union. It opened up the brutal Eastern Front, drawing millions into the fight. Then came a turning point. On the morning of December 7th, 1941, the Imperial Japanese Navy launched a surprise military strike against the United States naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. The attack, which lasted about 2 hours, resulted in the deaths of more than 2,400 Americans, the destruction of numerous ships and aircraft, and marked a turning point in U.S. foreign policy. The following day, December 8th, the United States declared war on Japan, officially entering World War II. On December 11th, 1941, just 4 days after the attack on Pearl Harbor, Germany and Italy, who were allies of Japan at the time, declared war on the United States. In response, the U.S. declared war on Germany and Italy the same day, thereby becoming fully engaged in both the Pacific and European theaters of the global conflict. America, the most powerful industrial nation on Earth, had now been pulled into the war. In 1942 and 1943, the tide slowly began to turn. To the east, the Soviets, aided by the brutal Russian winter, dealt a crushing blow to Hitler's ambitions in the Battle of Stalingrad, destroying the German Sixth Army. Meanwhile, to the south, the Allies launched the North African Campaign, defeating German forces in Tunisia. From there, the Allies invaded Sicily and Italy in July of 1943, forcing Mussolini to be deposed. Italy would formally surrender to the Allies in September. But the road to defeating Hitler would not run through Italy. It would run through France. At the Casablanca Conference in early 1943, Roosevelt and Churchill agreed. The next major blow had to be in Western Europe. They needed a direct assault, an invasion of Nazi-occupied France, to relieve pressure on the Soviet Union and open a Western front. So the planning began. In November 1943, at the Tehran Conference, Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin finalized the timeline. A massive invasion would take place in mid-1944. What followed was a monumental effort. The name of this most ambitious of plans? Operation Overlord. The invasion would land Allied troops on the beaches of Normandy in France. To ensure its success, a clever deception campaign, Operation Fortitude, was launched. Fake armies, dummy tanks, and misleading radio signals tricked Hitler into believing that the real attack would come to Calais, not Normandy. Meanwhile, the Allied bombing campaign began to target German factories, rail lines, and oil depots, softening defenses and crippling supply lines. In Britain, the buildup was staggering. 5,000 ships, 11,000 aircraft, and over 156,000 soldiers prepared for the invasion. As the training intensified, troops drilled on amphibious landings, paratrooper drops, and beach assaults. Then came June 1944. The weather had turned foul. High winds and rough seas made landing nearly impossible. But on June 5th, meteorologists forecasted a brief break, a narrow window of calmer conditions. D-Day was originally scheduled for June the 5th, but those storms caused a delay by 1 day. That narrow break in the weather offered one last chance. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander, faced probably one of the hardest decisions of his life. Finally, he gave the order, "We will go." At 6 a.m. on June the 5th, the final weather report confirmed the narrow window of calm. Eisenhower officially gives the green light. At 7 a.m., the invasion fleet sets sail from England. Over 5,000 ships move across the English Channel in heavy seas. 8 a.m., German defenses along the Atlantic Wall remain alert, but most commanders assume no invasion will come during the storm. Field Marshal Rommel, tasked with defending France, is away visiting his wife back in Germany. 10 a.m., 13,000 paratroopers from the US and Britain prepare for a night jump into occupied France. Their mission was to seize roads, bridges, crossroads, preventing German reinforcements from reaching the beaches. 1 p.m. Many soldiers that day write what could be their final letters home. Eisenhower shares his message with the troops. Quote, "You are about to embark on the Great Crusade. The eyes of the world are upon you." End quote. 3 p.m. German officers remain unaware of what's coming. Some of them are even at war games hundreds of miles away. 5 p.m. The naval convoy is crossing the channel. Even though there was a break in the weather, the seas are still rough. Many soldiers are seasick, huddled below the deck in silence. 7 p.m. The Luftwaffe sends out its last recon planes, but misses the approaching fleet. 9 p.m. American and British airborne divisions take off, bound for the dark skies over Normandy. 10:30 p.m. Operation Glimmer and Operation Taxable begin. Fake invasion signals and dummy paratroopers distract German defenses away from the real beaches. 11:30 p.m. The first paratroopers land in Normandy, setting up beacons to guide in the rest of the paratroopers. June 6, 1944. D-Day begins. Just before or after midnight, thousands of Allied paratroopers drop behind enemy lines, landing in the dark, scattered far away from their intended targets. Unfortunately, some drown in flooded fields. Others land directly into German fire. By 2 a.m., small units began their missions. British paratroopers seized Pegasus Bridge, a critical point to hold off German tanks. At 4:30 a.m., the naval bombardment begins. Battleships and cruisers open fire on German fortifications. At 5:30 a.m., the first wave of landing craft began their final approach. The troops on the landing craft pray. Many are still violently seasick. Enemy fire intensifies. 6:30 a.m., H hour. U.S. forces land at Omaha and Utah beaches. British and Canadian troops land at Gold, Juno, and Sword. At Omaha Beach, chaos reigns. The beach turns red as machine guns and artillery cut down wave after wave of American soldiers. Landing craft are destroyed. Some soldiers don't even make it to the beach, drowning under the weight of all the equipment they're carrying. At Utah Beach, tides push American forces off course, but this mistake proves lucky. They land in a less defended zone and begin advancing inland. At 8 a.m., German counterattacks begin, but disorganized command and scattered resistance give Allies time to regroup. At 9 a.m., engineers begin clearing beach obstacles. Reinforcements start to arrive. At 11 a.m., U.S. Rangers scaled the cliffs at Pointe d'Arc. Under intense fire, they were able to destroy German artillery threatening the beaches. At 12 p.m., British troops reached the outskirts of Bayeux, the first major town inland, and secured the town the very next day. At 2 p.m., paratroopers have disrupted German reinforcements throughout the countryside. It is reported that Hitler is still asleep. His generals hesitate to act without his permission. At 3 p.m., fighting is continuing to rage on Omaha Beach. Inch by inch, the U.S. troops advance. By 4 p.m., British and Canadian forces have pushed 6 miles inland from Gold and Juno beaches. At 6 p.m., French resistance fires rose up, sabotaging German rail lines and communication centers. It wasn't until 8 p.m. that German tank divisions were able to launch a counterattack, but those tanks are hit by Allied air power. At 10 p.m., after 12 hours of bloodshed, Omaha Beach is finally secured. By midnight on the 6th, essentially 24 hours since this whole thing started, over 156,000 Allied troops are now on French soil. The war and liberation of the Western Front had begun. However, the cost was immense. Over 4,400 Allied soldiers were killed on D-Day alone. More than 10,000 wounded or missing. German losses were estimated between 4,000 and 9,000 soldiers. But in the end, the mission was a success. The beaches held, the bridgeheads were established, and from there, the Allies would fight their way across France, liberate Paris by August, and less than a year later, stand victorious over a fallen Nazi regime. D-Day was not the end of the war, but it was the beginning of the end. And that's where this story begins. Actually, two stories I want to talk about. A few years ago, we had the Doomsday double feature. Now this is the D-Day double feature. The Last Rifleman and The Great Escaper. Before we begin, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to watch this video. I would like to doubly thank you if you're subscribed to this channel. Your feedback, at least the nice comments, as well as your viewership mean the world to me. And now on with the show. Sometime at the beginning of last year, I came across the trailer for the film The Last Rifleman, starring Pierce Brosnan. The trailer, for many reasons, captivated me, which led to my discovery that not only was this based on a true story, but there was also a twin movie that was based on the same real-life series of events. The other one was called The Great Escaper and starred Michael Caine in the main role. The Last Rifleman, originally released in 2023, is a fictionalized tribute to a real act of courage and remembrance. The film follows fictionalized Artie Crawford, a retired World War II veteran living in a nursing home. On the eve of the 75th anniversary of D-Day, Artie slips away without telling anyone, beginning a solo journey to Normandy to honor his fallen comrades. What makes The Last Rifleman so compelling is its emotional depth. This isn't really a war film in the traditional sense. There's very few battle scenes, very little gunfire, no grand explosions. Instead, it's more of a character study. It's about memory, loss, aging, and above all, the enduring loyalty between soldiers. Pierce Brosnan's performance is fantastic, and yet remarkably restrained. Known for his charm and charisma and good looks in films like GoldenEye, James Bond, here he dials it all the way back. He plays Artie as stubborn but vulnerable, haunted by guilt, but driven by duty. It's perhaps one of his most understated performances, and I think one of his best. The story itself is inspired by the real-life tale of Bernard Jordan, a British veteran who left his nursing home in 2014 to attend the 70th anniversary of D-Day. While Brosnan's Artie is a fictional character with his own backstory and motivations, the essence of that true event, the willpower of one aging man to keep a promise to the past, runs through every scene. The cinematography emphasizes quietness and stillness, ferry rides, long walks, the ocean. These visuals are paired with subtle musical cues and silent moments of reflection. It's definitely not a fast-paced film, and it shouldn't be. The pacing gives space for the viewer to sit with the weight of history. It doesn't seem like we're asked to admire Artie from a distance. It really seems like we're walking next to him. We feel the strain in his steps, the weight of memories that won't fade, his failing health, and all the other things that made this story heroic. The Last Rifleman isn't flashy, but that's really one of its strengths. It's about dignity. It's about finishing something even if you're the last one left to do it. On the other hand, where The Last Rifleman was quiet and poetic, The Great Escaper feels more grounded in a kind of British realism. Released the same year, The Great Escaper stars two screen legends, Michael Caine as Bernard Jordan and Glenda Jackson as his devoted wife Irene. The Great Escaper would be the final film role for both. Michael Caine announced his retirement from film right after this, and sadly Glenda Jackson passed away, I believe, right before the film had released. Unlike The Last Rifleman, The Great Escaper chooses to tell the real story of Bernard Jordan, the 89-year-old Royal Navy veteran who escaped from his nursing home in Hove in 2014 to attend the D-Day commemorations in Normandy. The film expertly blends two parallel narratives: Bernard's defiant journey to France and his wife Irene's reflections back home. This dual structure allows the film to explore not just war and remembrance, but also long-term love, aging, and the quiet bond between husband and wife. Michael Caine, as expected, delivers one of his finest late career performances. His Bernard is gruff, principled, and deeply haunted. We see flashes of the younger man, the sailor who stormed the beaches, but mostly we see the cost of survival. Glenda Jackson is radiant. Her Irene is sharp-witted, tender, and strong. Together, their chemistry felt very real. It's less about passion and more about partnership, the kind that's been tested and has lasted over the decades. Where The Last Rifleman fictionalizes and abstracts, The Great Escaper humanizes and remembers. It leans into simple details: Bernard forgetting his hearing aid, struggling to get a ticket, sharing stories with other veterans. There's humor too, but it's always laced with this undertone of melancholy. The filmmakers in both movies never really allow sentimentality to take over. The war is not glorified. If anything, it's mourned. Bernard doesn't attend the anniversary for glory. He goes because he feels like he owes something to the men who didn't come home. The direction, you could tell, was humble, for lack of a better word, almost minimalist, but it serves the story. There's very few dramatic montages, no swelling orchestras, just honest, well-deserved moments, a glance, a silence, a hand held. In the end, The Great Escaper is really a love story wrapped inside a war story. It's about remembrance, but it's also about companionship and what it means to keep going, even when there's no one left to remember but you. Despite the different approaches, both The Last Rifleman and The Great Escaper are films born from the same historic heartbeat. Both were inspired, as I said earlier, either directly or loosely, by the true story of Bernard Jordan, a World War II veteran who defied expectations and limitations to return to Normandy. And both films explore themes that are deeply universal: the long shadow of war, the burden of memory, the loneliness of outliving your comrades, and the quiet defiance of aging. Neither film is interested in violence or action. They strip away the myth of war and replace it with personal, human-scale stories of grief, honor, and closure. Both lead characters carry invisible wounds. They're not trying to be heroes. They're simply trying to do what they feel is right, even if no one around them understands why. And both films carry a quiet reverence for the past, not as an abstract idea, but as something that's alive and painful and unresolved. In short, these are sort of companion pieces, films that stand together as tributes to a vanishing generation. And while the stories may stem from the same source, the execution of The Last Rifleman and The Great Escaper is quite different. Let's start with the tone. The Last Rifleman is more stylized. It fictionalizes the core event and gives the main character, Artie Crawford, a more symbolic, almost mythical quality. He's not really Bernard Jordan as much as he is every veteran. The film is more cinematic in its scope and arguably more introspective. By contrast, The Great Escaper is much more grounded in realism. It's a true biopic, telling the actual story of Bernard and Irene. It sticks much closer to the known facts. The stakes feel smaller, but more intimate and more historically literal. Next, let's talk about the performances. Both are great. Not everyone will understand this next statement, but Pierce Brosnan's portrayal of Artie is a study in masculinity, a man hiding pain behind a wall of control. It's a solitary performance. Michael Caine's Bernard is much more open, more accessible. He lets the audience into his internal world, and when paired with Glenda Jackson's Irene, the emotional range expands to include love, regret, humor, and vulnerability. Another key difference are the structures of these movies. The Last Rifleman is almost entirely focused on the journey itself, from Northern Ireland to Normandy. It unfolds like a story from the olden times of a long pilgrimage, where Artie is meeting interesting characters along the way that help him along and add some color to his story. The Great Escaper, however, shifts between Bernard's journey and Irene's perspective back home. It becomes as much about a relationship as it is about a mission. And the last difference I'd like to discuss is the emotional focus of each film. The Last Rifleman is more about atonement. Artie is running from guilt, and his trip to Normandy is about making peace with himself. The Great Escaper is about remembrance and partnership. Bernard isn't escaping from something, he's returning to something. And Irene is part of that return, even from afar. In the end, both films take different roads, no pun intended, to arrive at a shared destination. A quiet and powerful tribute to those who served and those who stayed behind. In the world of cinema that often rushes past quiet moments, The Last Rifleman and The Great Escaper asks us to pause and remember, to reflect on courage, not only in terms of combat, but courage of character. We're asked to honor not only sacrifices made on the battlefield, but the battles fought long after, within memory, in silence, and with age. Whether you're drawn to the more fictionalized grace of The Last Rifleman or the grounded truth of The Great Escaper, both films remind us of something essential, that even in life's final chapters, there are still journeys worth taking, and stories that need to be told. When we consider the life of Bernard Jordan, or any soldier who has faced combat, our first and the correct instinct is to honor their service. We recognize the scars they carry, both visible and unseen. We're much more aware now of the toll of war, including the burden of PTSD, something too often ignored in the aftermath of the two world wars. After watching these two films, one thought sticks with me. Of all the wars that the United States has fought, officially, World War II is considered to be one of the most just wars. Even decades later, despite historical hindsight and critical analysis and secrets coming out and Monday morning quarterbacking, World War II stands out for its clarity of purpose. But if we're serious about honoring veterans like Bernard Jordan, past, present, and future, then perhaps the greatest tribute we can offer is restraint. War should remain as a last resort, reserved only for the most urgent and undeniable causes. Maybe the most effective way to heal the trauma of war is to prevent it in the first place. And with that, I'll leave you for now. Thank you so much for watching.